Hello and welcome. This is Bree, Stedman, host of Own Your BS, the podcast, where your negative head talk and the bullshit stories you tell yourself become irrelevant, and solution focus creates a path of emotional confidence, clarity, and control. Hello and welcome to episode 1 of Own Your BS, the podcast. Today we're going to explore I can't do this. Before getting into today's episode, I want to share a little secret with you. Right now, I'm sitting at my office with a microphone in my face, and I am nervous, I'm tongue-tied, and I'm a little bit scared. In truth, I've been wanting to release this podcast for 4 months, and I've been procrastinating. I myself have been stuck in a space of I can't do this. And so I felt today's episode, being episode number 1, would be a fitting episode to explore what I can't do this means, what it prevents us from doing, and more importantly, what we can do to turn I can't do this into I can. So when I started thinking about I can't do this, I started to explore what that looks like. And for me, and for many of the clients that I've worked with, I can't do this looks like a whole heap of excuses. All of the reasons as to why you can't change, grow, or move forward from where you are right now. And if we get into the deep nitty-gritty of I can't do this, quite often it's connected to a fear or a concern that is disguised as head talk. Over the course of this podcast series, this is exactly what I want you to start exploring. I want to give you, the listener, the confidence to listen to what it is that you're saying to yourself and then instinctively take it deeper, to reduce the harm that negative head talk has on you. So each week we're going to explore a specific story. We're going to look at it from all sorts of different angles, and most importantly, we're going to end with some strategic steps that you can put into place to replace that negative story with something that is more serving. I'm also going to be inviting some VIP guests onto the podcast so that we can have some discussion around female empowerment. Because ultimately the goal of this podcast is to help you feel like you do have choice, that you do have control, and that there is confidence within you waiting to explode. It just needs the right path to take. So, while I was creating or thinking about creating Own Your BS, the podcast, some of the excuses that I came up against was, I don't have the time. I can't do this because I'm too busy. I can't do this because I don't have the right equipment. I can't do this because. When you think about I can't do this, it's very, very often followed up with a because. And it's that because that is acting as your excuse. Now, the funny thing about excuses is that they create evidence in your unconscious mind and evidence in your conscious world that supports the I can't. So when you're hearing yourself saying things like, I can't do this because I don't have the time, the evidence that you are then shown both unconsciously and consciously is a busy schedule, is unexpected appointments or cancellations or a change of planned day that causes you to feel like you're chasing your tail. This is why it's so important for us to start listening to what it is that we're saying to ourselves, because those thoughts are creating our realities. And the really interesting thing about excuses is they build on themselves. And as they build on themselves, they start to distort our realities. So when you've got the excuse of, I don't have enough time, I can't do this because I don't know enough, those two excuses stack up on one another. And then they distort what your truth is by showing to you through evidence that you are too busy, or that you don't know enough, or the learning curve is too steep. And with this evidence, we then start to feel emotional. We feel overwhelmed. We feel out of our depth. We feel insecure. And those feelings in turn create more inner dialogue. People often ask me, what do I mean by female head talk? And what I mean is that continued cycle of feeling and thinking, feeling and thinking. And while it's true men also suffer from head talk, they don't get bogged down on it quite as often as females do, mostly because they don't connect to the same level of emotion that we as women do. You see, women have a large limbic system in our brain, which means we connect emotion to a lot more events, circumstances, and stories. So those thoughts that we keep getting caught up in, such as, I can't do this, fuel an emotional response within the brain that then portrays in the body. And because we are feeling, we are focusing then on something that feels out of control. So what does our brain do? Our brain starts to create another story to further provide evidence as to why the feeling is there. I think this is why my approach to Own Your BS is so different, because it's not so much about understanding why you think what you feel, why you think what you think. It's not so much about trying to understand where it has come from. It's more about changing your focus into, yes, this is what I'm thinking. Yes, this is what I'm feeling. But what am I going to do in this moment to take back what is rightfully mine? And that is my choice, my personal power. So, how do we turn I can't do this into something that's a little bit more proactive? Well, firstly, I'm going to encourage you to start exploring what is really going on. When you say, I can't do this because XYZ, what is that story making you feel? Are you feeling fearful? And if you're feeling fearful, fearful of what? Fearful of what other people will think? Fearful of the response that you might get? Fearful of change? When you say, I can't do this because, are you feeling insecure, doubtful, unworthy? The key to female head talk is identifying what your story is making you feel. So some questions that you can ask yourself to start exploring this deeper level of emotion is, firstly, what am I avoiding? When I say I can't do this, what am I avoiding? Am I avoiding judgment? Am I avoiding ridicule? Am I avoiding vulnerability? Am I avoiding action? Because sometimes we use I can't do this as an excuse to be lazy. So what are you avoiding when you say I can't do this? When you've identified that, what are you feeling? What does that avoiding, what does that thought make you feel? Now, another really interesting part about the female brain is that we, with our large limbic systems, have a number of ways that we can describe what it is that we feel. And so you'll hear over the course of Own Your BS, the podcast, me ask these same simple questions a number of times. And even if the circumstance feels familiar and similar to something maybe that you've experienced in the past, it's so important to always ask yourself, what is it that you're feeling? And then allow yourself to answer in whatever way, shape, or form comes natural to that question at that time. Because today I might feel overwhelmed by I can't do this. And tomorrow I might feel scared that I can't do this. And so even though the story is the same, the emotion changes, and as such, the emotion that changes needs to be addressed uniquely every time. So, when we identify what it is that we are feeling, and this is where I really want Own Your BS, the podcast, to empower you. I'm going to encourage you to start addressing that emotional charge. Now, up front, I'd like to maybe just let you all know that the strategies I share in Own Your BS, the podcast, are not long-term solutions to your emotional pain. They are just short-term, in-the-moment options that you can use to get out of feeling and into doing. So, when you identify what it is that you can't do, what you're avoiding, when you know what you're feeling, we're then going to explore addressing and releasing that emotional charge. And the one strategy that I want to share with you on this podcast, which I'm going to revisit a number of times, I just know it now up front, is one of my favorite strategies, and that is the balloon. Now, the reason that this strategy works so incredibly well for women is that it gives our brains an image to work with. And when we have an image that we can work with, whatever the mind sees, the body believes. So that image can be manipulated to reduce the intensity of an emotion that you are feeling. So let's work through this together. What are you feeling when you say, I can't do this? Name that feeling. Is it fear or worry, concern, insecurity, doubt? Call it out for what it is. Now, on a scale of 1 to 10, how strongly do you feel that emotion? 10 being really strong. Again, call it out. Where in your body does that feeling lie? Now, when we know what it is, how strong it is, and where it lives, we then have the ability to be able to release it. And we're going to do this through a very simple visualization. So right now, I invite you to close your eyes. And I want you to imagine a deflated balloon in the color of your emotion. And in a moment, we're going to take 3 big, deep breaths together. And with every breath in, you're going to bring that emotion up out of where it lives in the body into the breath. And then we're going to exhale and blow it into the balloon. And we're going to watch the balloon get bigger and bigger. And then we're going to pop it. So let's take a big deep breath in together. And exhale and blow that emotion into that coloured balloon. Take another big deep breath now. Bring every tiny little bit of that feeling that you feel into your breath. And exhale and blow it out into the balloon. And one last time for good measure, take a big deep breath in, bring the emotion up out of the body into the breath, and exhale and blow it out into the balloon. And see that big full balloon of that emotion that's connected to I can't do this. See it in front of you, and then pop it. Now, if we've found where the emotion lives in the body, and we've breathed it into a balloon, and popped the balloon, where did that emotion go? You've created an image that has allowed the release of the emotion from your body into the Netherlands. And so if you now feel back into that emotion, how strongly do you feel that emotion right now on a scale of 1 to 10? With confidence, I know the emotion has been reduced. And when you look back now on that thought of I can't do this because of XYZ excuse, how do you feel about that now? It almost becomes laughable when the emotion's not connected to the story, doesn't it? And this is the power of Own Your BS. So we now reframe I can't do this to something that allows and opens up for a whole heap of new possibilities. When the emotion is no longer charging your thoughts, I'm going to encourage you to replace the thought with how can I do this? So when I looked back at creating Own Your BS, the podcast, and I had those thoughts of I can't do this because I don't have the time, I can't do this because I don't have the equipment, I replaced the I can't do this with how can I do this? How can I do this with the time that I have? How can I do this with the equipment that I have? Or what do I need to do to get into a position where I can do this? A lot of our head talk comes back down to reframing the message that we're telling ourselves. And with a few simple tweaks, and most importantly, addressing the emotional charge beneath the head talk, we can find that we can take ownership. We can turn those bullshit stories and excuses into solution focus and emotional control. Thank you so much for joining me for episode 1 of Own Your BS, the podcast. I can't do this. Let's kick that to the curb and replace it with how can I do this? Or what do I need to do to get this done now? Join me again next week as we explore another common head talk story on Own Your BS, the podcast. And if you are struggling with something specific that keeps taking up your precious time, please feel free to send me an email to Bree@breestedman.com. Share with me what you're struggling with and let me help you to ditch those negative, sabotaging and destructive stories and turn them into emotional control, confidence and clarity. I'll see you next week.